All right. You're listening to America's Voice now. Thanks for riding with us for the morning. We've got one more segment to go, and this one ought to be a doozy. I'm going to pose this question, and I'm going to throw some information at you and let you make and draw your own conclusion. I encourage you to do your own due diligence and not just take my word for it, but evaluate the information that you can get from this and use that as a launch pad, if you will, to gather greater and better information and fully inform yourself about the issues surrounding any given topic. Use critical thinking skills to make sure that you're not, just falling prey to somebody else's opinion and accepting that. And then make a decision knowing that you've gathered all the available facts. Be prepared to be able to modify that decision over time as new information may come to light that would affect your overall viewpoint. But in this case, I'm asking the question, did Eric Holder just encourage and defend the principles of nullification? And I think by the end of this segment, you're going to say, yes, he did. And you're going to see the hypocrisy of the position of those who stand against nullification and its principles, and yet use them on a fairly routine basis. Holder came out the other day and he said, if I were the Attorney General in Kansas in 1953, I would have defended I would not have defended a Kansas statute that put in place separate but equal facilities. And he was referring specifically to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education case that led to public school integration and was the cause of major problems in the 60s. Now, he used that statement to exemplify his position on the idea that attorney generals within various states who disagree on their state bans on same-sex marriage and who feel that those bans on same-sex marriage are discriminatory are not obligated to defend those state limitations. So as an example, here in Missouri, my home state, we have a ban on the allowance of individuals who are under a same-sex marriage to file a tax return as a married couple. And I don't care whether you agree with it or not. I'm just using this as the example. The point is that if our Attorney General doesn't like that, Holder is encouraging him to not prosecute the violations. In fact, our governor the other day, Jay Nixon, a.k.a. Anyway, Jay Nixon came out the other day, and he said, it doesn't matter what the law says. If you're a same-sex couple, we encourage you to file a joint tax return. Now, that's in direct violation of the law. And as the chief executive officer of the state, as the governor, right, our executive leader, he has also, like President Obama, sworn an oath to uphold and execute faithfully the laws, right? So that's a whole different topic, by the way. And the state assembly is actually filing impeachment papers on him for that, amongst other things. But, by the way, isn't that interesting? Nobody in the news is talking about that. But here you have Eric Holder saying that if you don't believe that in a law because you feel it's discriminatory, you don't need to defend it. Now, when Missouri and other states filed their Second Amendment Preservation Acts, all of the anti-nullification people came out and said, you can't do that. That was settled back in the Civil War. The Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution says that federal law trumps all state law. That sounds like people talking out of both sides of their mouth, doesn't it? In other words, here you've got Eric Holder, who, while not in my opinion, is known to be the highest law enforcement officer in the land. I don't know how he possibly could qualify for that, but he who is under criminal and civil indictment for contempt of court, or contempt of Congress, excuse me. But anyway, irrespective of his official positioning, he is the highest law enforcement officer in the state, in the nation, excuse me. And as a result, he is giving guidance to attorneys general around the nation and governors and anyone else in law enforcement who says basically that if you disagree with the laws of your given state, then you don't have to defend those laws, and that would place you in the position of someone exercising the principles of nullification, whom Thomas Jefferson called the rightful remedy for states to employ when federal overreach is involved. In other words, if the federal government passes a law which is for all intents and purposes unconstitutional, that the states have an obligation and a right to utilize the, quote, rightful remedy of nullification to say, you may pass whatever law you want in Washington, D.C., but here in this state, we won't enforce it. Furthermore, we won't allow you to cross into our borders and enforce it. Isn't it interesting? Because this same crowd who's touting that it's okay under a law that you or they particularly disagree with, but it's not okay when their opponents use the same principle for something which they strongly believe in. In fact, Holder went out and made an even more ridiculous statement. He basically said that attorneys general should apply a high level of scrutiny to decisions on whether or not they want to defend laws that touch on constitutional issues like equality. Okay. And he if this isn't the picture of what you see when you look up the definition of hypocrisy in the dictionary, nothing is. He said the decision should never be political or based on policy objections. That coming from Eric Holder is more than laughable. He came out and said, and quote, and this is from an article in the New York Times. Engaging in that process and making that determination is something that's appropriate for an attorney general to do. Yet when Kansas filed and passed their Second Amendment Preservation Act, Eric Holder wrote to their attorney general and threatened him for saying we're nullifying federal gun laws. Kind of ironic, huh? Now, there are a group of attorneys in states, Virginia, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois, and Nevada. And they have all declined and said, we're not gonna defend the same-sex marriage bans against lawsuits that have been filed by gay couples. And New Mexico's Attorney General, who's also a Democrat, he's been challenging the long-standing legal interpretation of whether or not same-sex marriages and unions are permissible or impermissible in that state. So the point is that, and by the way, this also goes to the argument that the Defense of Marriage Act, which the president declined to and stated publicly that he was no longer going to defend, that is an act of federal nullification of a federal law, which is, how can that happen? Because the president is clearly given not only the right, but the obligation is outlined as a job function for him to faithfully execute the laws as they are written and passed. Not by him, not by the judiciary, but by Congress. And the Defense of Marriage Act, whether you agree with it or not, is current law. The immigration laws that we have on the books that say if you are picked up in the United States, you must be deported are law. Now, if you don't like them, that's different. Get them changed. But don't change them on your own unilaterally without authorization, without any congressional oversight, without any judicial review. When you have an obligation that is completely and 100%, 180-degree diametrically opposed to that position you've just taken. I mean, if you have, as your job description, to faithfully execute the laws as they are passed by Congress, and you do everything in your power to not do that, I don't understand how you can not be fired. And that's the president. No wonder his attorney general is out there touting nullification, except he doesn't call it nullification. He came out the other day, or not the other day, a month or two ago, and said he's not going to pursue federal limitations on and federal laws in the states of Colorado and Washington state related to marijuana. Because those states have passed and made legal the use of marijuana, not for medicinal purposes or anything else, but purely for recreational, I want to get high purposes. I don't care where you stand on the concept of marijuana. We are only talking about the concept and the principle of nullification. So take your ideological hat off and put it aside. It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with any of these principles. What I'm trying to get you to understand and see is that these groups, and it's various groups, on one hand, they use the principles of nullification to advance their own agenda, political and ideological agenda, and then they turn around and with the same exact mouth, they decry and defame those who would also try to use them, but in an even more lawful way, by making it a state limitation in writing, not just some declaration by some executive officer somewhere, i.e. the state attorney general or the state governor. I mean, here we're talking about bills that are passing through state legislatures, which mean that clearly they have the support of the entire state assembly, or they wouldn't be able to get it through and get it passed. And in many cases, governor signed. So now you've got a state law, which you're told cannot stand because it's a nullification of a federal principle and federal supremacy clause rules apply and federal rules trump state rules. Then you got the same attorney general who's touting that on one hand, turning around and saying, but if it's one of my pet projects, then you're free to do whatever you want. Very interesting. I don't have any respect for Eric Holder. I think the guy is a lawbreaker, a traitor, a treasonist, a racist, self-serving, a politician through and through. And frankly, if he were arrested today, tried and convicted, and spent the rest of his days never leaving a cell, not even for a ray of sunshine, it would be too good for him. He exemplifies everything that is against the rule of law. He is arbitrary, he is capricious, he is racist, he is discriminatory, and he's hypocritical. He's actually gone so far as to instruct federal prosecutors to stop charging nonviolent drug defendants that carry for offenses that have like these mandatory minimums. He's informed and I don't care where you stand on drugs. This is not about the topic. If you don't like the fact that he's done this, and I don't disagree with him on the mandatory minimum thing for drug offenses. It's ridiculous. But it's not the point. The point is that he's breaking the law himself. And you can't have the chief law enforcement officer of the country who just walks around and acts as if the rules don't apply based on whatever his personal preferences and ideology are. That's wrong. And it sends the wrong message. That's the message that's being sent to your local police department that says it's okay to beat the snot out of this guy because he's not cooperating or because he's committing a belligerent act. Don't you see? This is all top down. And Barack Obama and guys like Eric Holder are the guys and the girls who are showing everybody else that it's okay to break the rules, but only when you're the lawbreaker. Nobody else can, and it's all up to your subjective judgment. And the word subjective and the rule of law can never be used in the same sentence. They are diametrically opposed. They are the equivalent of matter and antimatter, and they cannot coexist and occupy the same space in the time-space continuum. Period. End of discussion. You want to know what's wrong with America? This is the kind of thing that's wrong with America. For those of you that are biblically minded, what did Jesus Christ say? You cannot serve two masters. By the same token, you cannot serve the law but violate it simultaneously, while at the same point in time expressing to us how wonderfully magnificent you are. You don't have that right. That is not a function that you can do. Not and have any level of credibility, not and have any moral standing. I use the term standing because that's a word the courts use to say, you don't have a right to hold this case. You don't have any standing. This hasn't affected you. Well, guess what? We're all affected by the standing involved in this, because every one of us is subjected to the law. But if the law isn't carried out by men of objectivity, then it's the rule of men and not the rule of law. Eric Holder is the poster boy for the rule of men. Barack Hussein Obama is the poster boy for the rule of men. Hillary Rodham Clinton, the poster girl for the rule of men and women. I do what I want, do as I say, not as I do. When I want your opinion, I'll tell you what it is. That's wrong. And it's unacceptable because it breaks down the absolute, it shreds. It is the equivalent of a moth that eats away at the fabric itself that holds the nation together. And when that fabric is weakened, when the threads are bare, when the fibers are chewed through and broken, the fabric comes apart. And it can no longer sustain or bear the weight. Why is our country coming apart at the seams? Because the fabric of the rule of law is being destroyed by those who gain or benefit, or in some short way position, gain either their personal agenda, their personal ambitions, or their long-term ideological ambitions and agendas. And there's nothing you can do that justifies that position. Did Eric Holder just defend and support and institute and encourage nullification? You betcha. And every person who understands the principles of nullification should be using this as the example as they go forward. The next time someone says to you, forget nullification, that's not a legitimate principle, that was all solved in the Civil War. When the Supremacy Clause takes control, the federal government overrules the state law. We solved that back in the Civil War when we showed that the North could make sure that the South adhered to their ruling. Supremacy. Turn around and throw him Eric Holder's story. Make sure you're thoroughly understanding of it so that you are well enough versed on the topic so that you can bring these things out and express them in a way that's convincing and clear and empirical. Be prepared to fight your case. But know that you've got the tools to do so. Eric Holder is a sad excuse for an attorney general. He's a sad excuse for a lawyer. He's a sad excuse for a member of the law enforcement community. He's a sad excuse to be the representative of law in the United States of America. You've got an excellent tool in your kit bag. Nullification is a supreme solution to a major problem. Yet it's given no credibility or credence by the Ministry of Propaganda, the mainstream media, governments again, in particular, constitutional professors who argue against the validity of the idea and the concept. Here you've got all the ammunition to throw right at them and say, well, what about Eric Holder? He suggests nullification if you disagree with same-sex marriage laws, if you disagree with immigration law. How do you justify that, Mr. Professor? How do you justify that, Mr. Politician? How do you justify that, Mr. News Anchor? You can't have it both ways. This article can be found at cnsnews.com. Charlie November Sierra. cnsnews.com. It's called Holder. Discriminatory laws don't need to be defended. Wow. That's right out of the mouth of the devil himself. Ladies and gentlemen, use his words against them. All right. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. We're going to wrap our show today. Thank you very much for your rapt attention and your participation. I hope you found this valuable. If you did, please join us and like us on our Facebook page. You can simply go to our Facebook page and go to facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Please hit the like button. If you have an opportunity to do so on our Spreaker audio podcast app, please do that. That helps us to get to a number that we can then get on iHeartRadio. And if you found this on either video or audio, please share it with your friends if you find this to be valuable. Next time you're in the nullification discussion, here's the perfect segue. You can also find our website at americasvoicenow.org. Thanks so much for being with us today. We appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow morning bright and early. You've been listening to America's Voice Now.